David Kilcullen. Um, and he is kind of actually like the godfather of coin. Like there's all these other names we know of, like Petraeus in particular, who implemented coin. But the actual strategy was kind of put in the ear by David Kilcullen, largely. He's one of the the intellectual heft, if there is any, behind the concept. Comes from this guy who was he was an Australian infantry officer for like 20 years. I guess starting in the would have been the late 80s or 80s. And he was deployed in like places like East Timor and Bougainville and you know what's strange about it, and I honestly don't know, it was never been clear to me, is like his background supposedly is he played a role in the successful conclusion of a counterinsurgency. Everyone was looking somewhere for someone who knew how to do this and do it and win, you know, and succeed. And you know, if I'm being honest, I saw him speak many times. I had to go through many of his things, and I don't know that anyone ever really explained to me what he did in Indonesia that made him successful, or if he even was. I mean, frankly, I don't think anybody really knows about the Indonesian insurgency or, you know, its successful conclusion. So he did this, and then in 2000, in the early 2000s, he was on sort of some courtesy tour in the United States as the Iraq War was beginning, and he managed in like 2004 to ingratiate himself. He had been a lieutenant colonel in the Australian Army. He had managed to ingratiate himself and get himself hired as the chief strategist for the Department of State's counterterrorism advisor, which was a new position directly under Condoleezza Rice. And from there, he, you know, immediately kind of jumped into Iraq and creating what they called the Coin Academy, which the Counterinsurgency Academy, which actually he didn't create it. Apparently, somebody else created one at a camp. It's sort of one of these main logistical camps where people first entered Iraq from. Somebody had, a lot of times, it's very common when you first get to a new operating theater, let's say, like when I first got to Afghanistan, I landed at Camp Leatherneck. We all did, and we had to go through like 5 days of acclimation and training. Like, what are the latest threats? Some people that are there that actually know the latest strategies and threats they're going to teach you there. For the entire time prior to your deployment, you're learning from like old hand. When you're in the United States, you're learning from the old hands who learned it all from before, but they're not like right there on the ground, and they're not updating their information as easily or frequently. So when you get there, you're always getting this like not even refresher training, but like update and extension training, especially. And it is reasonable because also people, when they actually get there, there's this moment of like, okay, this is real now. And they pay more attention than in the 2 months prior to going overseas, when they might be going out partying on the weekends and getting it all out of their system, or spending time with their family, or just have other concerns. Now you're here, you're only here, and it's real.
I'm just curious, a couple things. Was there any like altitude adjustments that you guys needed to make? Because I know like parts of Afghanistan are at altitude, and I'm just wondering if they prepared you
that
for that. And then also like just I don't know, like I when I just moved across the country, it took me like a couple days to like just get oriented. Like I felt like I was a little bit in a fog and a little bit confused, just because like well, the altitude was different, but like the smells and like kind of the background, the horizon, and how Lutz was just so different. It was just a little bit disorienting.
Yeah, actually, you know, it's that as I understand it is part of it, that you had the acclimation time there was in part to, like, we're not going to send them direct. People don't get sent directly to the area they're going to operate in. They have a few days where they're just waiting, and part of that is, I think, just logistical kinks working out. Like, the flights into the country are one thing, and they're not going to, those can get delayed, so we're not going to schedule their helicopter flights to their location. We're going to put some lag time. But also, I think part of it is um, climate and altitude acclimation, and then also we gotta use this time wisely to prepare them for what they're actually going to face. So while that just is a thing that generally exists, and somebody in the army started incorporating teaching some counterinsurgency ideas that they were calling a 5-day coin academy in Camp Taji, which I think is north of Iraq, huge logistical base, or north of Baghdad, I should say. But Kilcullen saw this and really, really ran with it and made it his thing. Added the intellectual heft to it. So he had written some books before about his time there, and in particular, he got to he got into Petraeus' ear very early on. He was the one feeding Petraeus the ideas of counterinsurgency, basically. And there's some sense to the ideas. Famously, Petraeus sort of ordered everyone to read what he called the 28 Articles, which is sort of a list of concepts and ideas, principles that they expected the military to put into practice. And some of it was this stuff you can't, almost like proactive policing, you need to get out onto the streets, walk a beat, not be huddled up in your fobs, don't be hiding in your base waiting for something to happen. Go out and patrol and engage with the people, show them that you're this power on the streets, that create a security bubble where they feel comfortable. All this kind of which is interesting because they use that analogy that you need to get out, like patrolmen need to get out of their police cars concept kind of stuff. Because
when you say people are required to read, do you mean everyone? Like
usually it would be like the officers,
okay.
Officers of like the infantry, like company level officers would be the ones that would be expected to read this sometime in their pre-deployment training. That's where it gets interesting too, because like we said before, when you're back stateside, when the Coin Academy moved stateside, which you're going to have people that are not necessarily, it's not their first priority to do their homework at night. There will be some officers who do and some who don't. Most who don't. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So
yeah,
even
that's
if
what I
this,
was gonna ask next.
yeah,
Did people actually read them? Well, it did. Like, who knows? Maybe not reading them. I could see that. Like, not reading them maybe somehow gave them a leg up because they weren't quite so ingrained into failed policy or something like that. But I'm just curious of what your thoughts
yeah.
are on that.
Well, so I can absolutely so the reason I ended up interacting with this guy is that, well, first, like in our pre-deployment trainings, we had to go through Coin Academy, but then in my last 3 years in the Marine Corps, I was at the Civil Affairs School, and I was teaching my job to other Marines, and we, as Civil Affairs, sort of being this more involved in, we're more involved in coin operations, we had a role in pre-deployment trainings for units, and we would be the ones, the commander of the schoolhouse, the Civil Affairs Schoolhouse, was an Aussie also. His father was American, I believe, but he was born and raised in Melbourne. And so he had this crazy Australian accent, and he was our commander, and he had some connection to Kilcullen through that, having been, so he was kind of the guy, he would coordinate and plan for Kilcullen to come and Cullen would be like the keynote speaker. You know what I mean? Give like one of the lead-off speeches for every 2-week Coin Academy and then finish it up. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it would be this nonstop series of lectures and readings and discussion groups and whatnot. But I would be and I basically, as a sergeant at the time, when I first got there, would be basically the like set up the projector support guy mostly. And for what it's worth, I didn't have a bone to pick with the guy, but I did notice he would never like acknowledge my existence. He you know what I mean? At the time, I was like, I was an unusual sergeant because I had a college degree in political science and history. You know what I mean? My boss took me pretty seriously there, that I knew what I was talking about with this stuff, but they knew, because an average sergeant hasn't necessarily gone to university or whatever. And my boss took me seriously because he knew my background. He kind of seen my resume, you know. But this guy just seeing a rank on my shoulders, be like, "What are you doing here? Why are you talking? Get out!" Like I'm a lieutenant, you know, just too important to talk to a peon like me, you know. Um, but he would be one of the keynote speakers at these things. And so while we were there, yeah, absolutely. A lot of times, depending on the unit and just the different officers, the people being trained might just be like, "This is a waste of time. I'm required to sit through this lecture for the next 2 weeks, but I'm not investing any more time and effort into it than I have to. And in fact, I have a company to be in charge of. I'm too important to be being here. So I'm going to have somebody running in it. I'm going to be running in and out, taking phone calls, doing other things because we're leaving for Afghanistan in 2 weeks, and this is not the most important thing."
Right.
You know what I
You
mean?
know, everybody's been through a mandatory training when they got a pile of work on their desk
Mhm.
and, you know, deadlines to meet. And it's like, the hell do I have to do this for? I got other shit to do.
Yeah. So it was really a mixed bag about who was like really drank the Kool-Aid and who didn't. Which is in a sense unfortunate because it gives him top cover for, well, they just didn't really do it right. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Um, but yeah, he would be the guy in charge of sort of. Well, he wasn't in charge so much as the guru. Like if we could get him to speak at it, that was going to be a better Coin Academy. They knew the name. The name rang out. Oh, Kilcullen's going to be there. We're going to listen to him. He's got great things to say. He wrote the book on it. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's one thing to have the other guys talk about it, but um, he he also, like, Petraeus specifically went to him at one point and had him write something called counterinsurgency guidance, and later he basically was the major author of the coin manual, that the field manual that the military produced. He was sort of like the thought leader behind it. um, Kind of famously, and I don't know if you have that image handy, like, Coin, as it was taught, tried to teach that there's this really involved, intricate structure, and you're getting into, you know, you're getting involved in something you can't fully understand. And if you could see this image, if you guys, for those who aren't listening, you're basically looking at a spider web, a multicolored spider web that some egghead at the Coin Academy at some point cooked up as, like, this is depicting all of the relationships you need to understand. Study this chart. This will, all the answers lie within. But eventually, over time, even among those of us that taught coin, regarded it as a joke, that this is a ludicrous way to try to teach anything. So we would show it as, this is ridiculous. You know what I mean? Like,
I
this
mean,
is,
for people who aren't watching, it looks like maybe you could say almost like a flight map, like of where like Southwest Airlines of where they fly to around the globe, because like
mm,
every dot it looks like it's connected to anything, or it looks like maybe at one point in time this was a legible thing, but then some little kid wanted to play connect the dots with it and connected every single dot to every single other dot, and so it doesn't even seem how this could in any way be useful. I mean, I'm looking at this thing and everything goes everywhere. There's like you know what? Everything's connected to everything else by six different connections. It has to be completely
yeah.
useless.
So on the chart of these things, like the insurgents and drug dealers and the domestic government and the domestic military and our military, and how they're all, and the tribes and the people and all of these different things, how do they connect to each other? And it's just this mishmashed web. Um, and again, somebody spent a lot of time working on this, but I mean, it made it into, like, it made it into the New Yorker and stuff. Is like, this is ludicrous. Like, this is one of the most famously bad infographics ever produced. You know, um, I'd love to drop. There's a Twitter account called, like, militarycharts.com, military charts or something like that, that is worth taking a look at for just a laugh, because it's the same kind of stuff, just convoluted, like, step one, underpants, step two, question mark, step three, profit, kind of stuff that people in the military will produce. And this is just kind of another one of those. But even then, and where it gets really funny is that they tried to translate this into Pashto and teach this to Afghan officers, because Kilcullen's big gripe eventually became like they decided, well, if we're teaching this and we're also training the Afghan military, well, we're going to need the Afghan military to implement this. You know, we're going to need the Afghan military to do all of the counterinsurgency things we're going to try to do if we're going to have them take over from us. So they tried to run coin academies for the Afghan military and translate this into Pashto, and it was basically met with uproarious laughter and went absolutely nowhere.
Right.
Like almost instantaneously, there's an article from Small Wars Journal that talks about it, but like as soon as they said, okay, well, the Afghan army is going to be in charge of counterinsurgency now, they put it on to some colonel and it went nowhere. Like it was just considered universally by the people of Afghanistan to be a waste of time, you know, and by a lot of people in the U.S. military too. And I have come to be in agreement with that. So that's kind of where he kind of got he was, like I said before, he got in the right position, just happened to have whatever charisma and intellectual background, having written a book or two and have the chops by being in a place that no one else really studied, to get in and be like, this is how this war can be won. And got into a lot of people's ears and planted this seed that grew into the last 20 years of sort of failed policy. For what it's worth, just to give him his due, he did kind of say that the Iraq War was a huge mistake from pretty early on, perhaps even before the war started. He said it was a colossal mistake, but then sort of refocused on, well, it was a huge mistake, but we need to focus on cleanup now. You know what I mean? This coin, even in his mind, coin is the last best option. You know, it's according to him, it really should only be undertaken when all other options have failed.
Although I will say that seems like kind of a convenient position to take, right? Like he's selling a product, right? Mm-hmm. Like I am sure he made a lot of money off of this whole thing, right?
Yep.
So if you come in saying that
advisor,
I'm doing my best I can to clean up the mess that you made, it's an awful good way to be not responsible for anything that, comes. You know what I mean? Well, it would have been worse. I didn't think we should do it in the first place, but now that it was here, I was doing the best that I could to fix it. I don't know. It just seems very convenient to me.
Yeah, it does. It is exactly that. And, it's kind of an interesting position he's put himself in. And for what it's worth, he did also oppose like drone bombing, and it's kind of it's the same concept of like that he would say before, where you need to be on the streets, engaged with the people and win their trust, not like buttoned up inside your trucks or never leaving your base. The same thing if you're just lobbing rockets at people seemingly randomly and out of nowhere, you're not gaining trust and really dispersing the insurgency. So he did oppose like the drone strikes and basically airstrikes generally. Well, I wouldn't stretch so far as to say airstrikes generally. I should hold my tongue there. But
do you know about night raids? Just because that's like kind of another.
That's I do not know. I don't know. But I would generally guess that he would be opposed to those. Except I would probably with some caveats that he would not want that.
So I mean, it is interesting that at least I guess this guy is like dedicated to the coin principle, like pretty thoroughly. Where like obviously McChrystal and Pedraeus weren't, because they were carrying out all these drone strikes and night raids and right. Okay, all right. So what else do we have here?
So he did have, it's interesting. There's some, just to call out, he did have some sort of intellectual back and forth with Andy Basovich and Daniel Larson over this, and their differences were not they kind of, I think how when you're writing in text, sometimes it can be a little more sensitive in academia too, that, getting criticism is not always taken well. But they did, there's some articles, we'll put what I've got the links for you, by Andy Basovich and Daniel Larson, sort of going through his books and his theories and kind of giving their critiques, which are probably more valuable than mine. And then what's interesting too, and I just want to include this for just with all of these guys, the where are they now aspect is he's still selling books and he's still getting interviewed at least regularly in the Australian ABC affiliate about like as you know as the war in Afghanistan was closing, he was their like go-to commentator and sort of saying, yeah, if they had done it my way, it would have been all right. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Even then and there, and he runs a group out of Denver that he's the CEO of a group called Cordillera Applications Group that does some kind of let's say interesting stuff. He they do things like doing urban public safety and geopolitical intelligence. Their main contract, unsurprisingly, is with DoD and training. But they also interestingly have so one of the areas he seems interested in is like littoral cities, like these megalopolis cities like Karachi and stuff like that. And he does say that you couldn't even fight a counterinsurgency in one of those because a whole division would be swallowed up in a few blocks, which is interesting. And so he sort of goes into this thing um, about how to manage and design cities, and he has a contract with the city of Hampton Roads, Virginia, which is a huge naval part of like Virginia Beach Naval Station. Um, it's got a 1.25 million people in the area, and his organization runs coordination for their emergency operations center. And he's sort of seems to be transitioning into this concept of sort of policing being coin kind of stuff that running like controlling cities in emergencies or unstable situations is what their interest is now, and he's applying the same principles to like collecting data and driving and getting police out on the streets kind of stuff. So if that were to grow and influence, I'd be, it kind of contribute. It's another part of that police militarization thing. Effectively,
Right.
we're going to take the strategies we've developed in the military all the way back from a century ago, and we're going to apply them here at home. You know,
And on top of that, they're looking to ramp up a domestic war on terror. So, this guy
God, I didn't
is,
even think about that aspect.
he's probably doing this because he's seen the writing on the wall that this is where the money's gonna be. You can't fight a counterinsurgency in China, so where do you get defense dollars? That's gonna be the war on terror at home. Anything else, or should we move on to number two?
Yeah, just he still has some intellectual cachet. He's still getting asked to do lectures at universities. Is the only other thing I'm going to add in. So just keep your eyes peeled for this, particular snake oil salesman, and
Yeah,
he hasn't gone away yet,
he might be
unfortunately.
making $1 million off of a local government near you, so you gotta keep your eye out.
Yeah.
Stanley McChrystal's another one who's made millions of dollars off of like the city of Boston and the state of Missouri for helping them introduce their failed COVID policies. So